Hi guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Paula. If you have not already and would like to, I would really appreciate a subscribe hit, a bell hit, all that good stuff. I do one-on-one coaching for folks who live with daily symptoms of CPTSD, whether it be from childhood trauma or from complex trauma from something more recent in your life, like a relationship, a job, both, all of the above. So, what I want to talk to you about today is something I've seen on many other channels that are addressed to folks with complex trauma, and it's something that I thought I was crazy for so long, but to see other people validate it is incredible, and that is why I had such a freaking terrible time in therapy, and why I will probably never go back to therapy modalities that are specifically oriented around behavioral stuff, cognitive stuff. If you're not already catching on, I'm really not a fan of CBT anymore, so I want to just tell my story. I realize that a lot of elements of my story are just personal to, me interacting with a specific therapist that I did experience, and I realize that some of you guys have complex trauma and have fantastic experiences of CBT, so this isn't my attempt consciously to bash the entire modality, but I want to tell you about how I experienced it, specifically as possible, why it did not work for my specific brain. And I'm going to make this somewhat fast because there's mosquitoes everywhere. So, when I was first experiencing my personal symptoms of CPTSD, I got the brunt of, my idiosyncratic anxieties. I've always had a very anxious disposition since forever. But I got really, really intensified anxious disposition after I took a specific job in my life. And essentially, as soon as I left the cozy cradle of school. So I stuck to school for so long, and as soon as I was spat out of the system, I was like, oh my god, the real world is terrifying. So when all of these symptoms started creeping up, first thing I did was go to my then employer and say like, hey, those benefits, you guys have therapists, right? And they were like, sure do. And so I filled out a form that said I have anxiety. I didn't know what else to call it. And I'm sure you guys struggle with the same thing. And to this day, in the DSM-5, there is no diagnostic criteria for the symptoms of CPTSD. So as of yet, this is still kind of like a whole mental experience, mental, emotional, physical experience that is, it's not fully figured out yet. We just know that it feels hella real. So I told them I've got anxiety. I was immediately assigned a therapist who worked with CBT as her main modality, and that modality was so in vogue. That was about 7 years ago now, and it still remains that way. I think it's kind of fading out now, or at least other modalities are joining forces with it so that it's a bit more balanced, which is great. But my most dominant experience with CBT was, well, my therapist was just very attached to it. She was a lady who I think had a decent amount of control over her own kind of inner critic, like that kind of voice, that internalized mother voice, that very harsh, very emotionally driven voice that lives in a lot of us folks with complex trauma. And so she was in love with the rational. She was very, very in love with the rational. And one thing the most dominant thing I was given in that experience of therapy with her, which lasted a couple of years, was charts. Lots of homework. So much CBT homework. And so I was encouraged to basically be in the position of analysis, the analyzer of my thoughts. So if a thought came up and it was an uncomfortable thought, first of all, we labeled it as uncomfortable. This is already something I no longer vibe with. And then I would sit down and write down the associated behavior, give myself an alternative thought. Lovely, in theory. That's the thing. For me, the experience of CBT was all theory. It was all analysis. And the thing was, I'd spent so much of my life wondering why I never felt fulfilled when I was in places where it was intellect over heart leading the way forward. So I spent, as I said, the majority of my life, like I was PhD track. I thought I wanted to be a university professor. So I was around a lot of academics, and it's the same thing there. It's like, it's so frontal lobe to the point where it becomes your only mechanism for figuring your way out of life, experiencing life. Everything is done through braining it. So I had a really hyper developed relationship to my brain. And what CBT did, in my experience anyway, was emphasize that not only had my brain gotten me to this place, but also it was the same brain that had to figure out a way out. So this is not how I roll anymore, because instead, personally, for me in my coaching practice, and what I had to realize through several years of doing CBT and just being constantly frustrated, like it would just piss me off. It was just like rage. Like I was like, someone is not hearing me. And I would keep saying to my therapist, like, hey, this works for like really basic thoughts, but like my irrational fear of sleep, which arises every single night and absolutely destroys me psychologically, is going nowhere. Is there something else we can do here? And she was like, with practice comes clarity. And we would just keep doing fucking charts. The thing is, the brain is already so exhausted. The intellect is so exhausted. We already live in such hyper vigilant frontal lobe places when we have experiences of complex trauma. What has worked for me, what really pulled me out of it, was somatic experiencing. I did this specifically through a shadow work course, which I totally stumbled upon. I just wanted something that was like full bodied. And it didn't like cure me, but it got me just to know that there's other ways of being out there. But it was so helpful because it got me out of here. And it got me into here. And into here, this is the biggest one, the gut and my feeling of safety and confidence and control over my life. And it got me like directly in relationship with other people. It got me really loud, when appropriate, got me really messy, emotionally got me like vulnerable in front of other human beings. So that was the really big healing difference that I go forward with in my own coaching practice. I want people to be in their emotions, not in the way that they analyze their emotions. I don't want us to be up here. This part of us has already done so much work, in my opinion, in my non-professional opinion, that I want to give it a rest. And this has been the biggest change for me personally, coming out of CBT and entering the realm of somatic shadow work, neuroplasticity, which is also all about movement and recognition of when we're too upped. Is that there's other tools, there's other methods of supporting ourselves and of navigating the experience of life with, other than just the mind and the intellect and our analysis brain. And so, coming out of that and just knowing, whenever I feel myself going into intellect mode, into overthinking mode, I can physically just teach myself how to calm down, how to literally slow down. And in noticing and feeling the contrast between busy brain, slow body, very, very slowly, the two start to kind of speak to one another, to match up, to pass messages, to realize, whoa, like my old backup, I've been using him a whole lot. He's feeling really overheated. I'm gonna go and use other methods of support as soon as I notice this. I don't want to rely on the mind as my only support system. So that was the biggest one, is that I constantly felt like my already very, very tired analytical brain was just once again being asked to do all the work in CBT, and it just felt beyond exhausting. It was a kind of mental burnout that I haven't felt since I stopped, which is fantastic, but so many of you guys, I feel like, will relate to it, so let me know if that's the case in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your experiences as well. Other thing that I'm very pleased to have moved on from is just the setup of conventional therapy. So when I talk about this, I really got to recognize, I know this is so hard to find any alternatives to. I live in Canada. Here, if you're getting like paid for by your insurance therapy, sessions are about 45-50 minutes, not even an hour. And in my experience, I spend probably 15 minutes just trying to feel a decent level of trust or comfort in the room. And the room was very red tapey feeling. I would really love to know, like, guys, if you've got like a great therapist, like, share their names, yo, for the sake of everyone else here. But mine was very classic, like chair, couch. And it felt like an office. It felt very red tapey, and it brings back, I think, a lot of deep authority figure fear in folks. Like, I didn't realize this. If you'd asked me when I was in the midst of it, did I trust my therapist, I'd be like, oh yeah, she's super cool. No, I absolutely did not. I absolutely did not, because I did get a lot of times whenever I did go into panic mode, sometimes I did go into full CPTSD wound mode. And instead of having the time to walk me through an emotional cycle to help me hit regulation after dysregulation, well, my therapist had to go. There was a client outside the door. And so I was kicked out with as much love as she could clinically master at the time, while still keeping her schedule. And she would say, like, you really gotta go emerge. You gotta get checked in, because I don't want to leave you like this. I gotta know that you're gonna be okay. When we are in such an activated state of wound, and then the time clock runs out, when therapists are prompted to ask those safety questions of us, like, can you tell me that you'll be okay? And we're expected to go from extreme emotionality to rationality like this, it doesn't always work. So there have been brain scans of folks who have CPTSD done. You'll also hear this from the crappy childhood fairy, Anna Runkle. She is so wonderful. When we are in a state of our chronic stress, so when we're in the wound, this is how I call it. When we're in the wound, we're fully emotional. The rational brain is off. All emotion. And we're not necessarily living from the emotions that are actually going to keep us objectively safe and comfortable. So we're in a really irrational, totally emotional space. And then we're being told by someone, you gotta go to the hospital. They're saying this from a place of safety. They're in a rational place saying this. We're not in an irrational place hearing this. So it's very rejecting. It's very confusing. This is my experience anyway. It was very, very... well, to be frank, I just felt dropped. I felt terrified of myself. The thing that it prompted in me, there was only probably 3 sessions like this where I would get really activated, and then it would be, unfortunately, time to GTFO. But every time what it did was place a little seed deep in my core beliefs that there was something about my emotionality that was not safe for me. There was, when I expressed myself, it would be safe, 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 and then suddenly I would hit a realm that said not safe. And so that is an extremely, in my opinion, damaging ideology to put out into the world. And so, again, I recognize this is not the intention of professionals. But for me, as someone in that experience, that's how it hit. Because again, we're not absorbing this from a place of like, oh, this person's doing their job. Oh, I get it. Later we might be able to do that. But there's still, the emotional body is going to take that response and internalize the shit out of it. And it's going to make you remember, parts of me are not okay. Parts of me I must hide. Parts of me are not safe. Parts of me I must live in fear of because other people have told me that's fucked up. So our emotional body, when it doesn't have its irrational caretaker present, that kind of inner parent, however you want to think about it, it's like a wounded child. You could call this the inner child if you want to. There's so many different ways to label this energy, this very like helpless, at times, energy, purely feeling body. It's very freaking vulnerable. So, one thing that I have made priority in my coaching, in my own coaching, like my one-on-one practice, is my sessions are long and they are well time cushioned. I will never ever leave someone dysregulated. We must complete the emotional cycle, or else just bottom line damage gets done. In my opinion, damage gets done. I don't want that to happen anymore, and I want to teach people what it feels like to go through. I imagine it like a big wash machine cycle. Like, we've got to let the cycle finish. You wouldn't just rip your clothes out in the middle and be like, good enough, put them in the dryer. Like, we have to let things go through, and it's really, really beautiful to teach someone about their own way of being when they really start to feel like, oh, that's my dysregulation. Okay, we're going through it, we're breathing, we're processing if possible, and then we're settling back down, we're grounding, we're coming into regulation again. There's nothing scary about me at my peak, and there's nothing necessarily better about me at regulation. I just have different versions of me, and I get to approach all of them with compassion. So, those are my two big qualms with my personal experience of therapy. So yes, CBT is a modality, in some ways was a bother for me. Y'all hear that little red squirrel? It's cute. And then there's just a lot to the red tape, the structure of professional therapy, and I do have sympathy for these folks. There's a very good reason I have not gone to school specifically to do the work that I do with folks, because I don't want to work in a red tape environment. I don't want to be at the mercy of all of these implied rules. I want people to be able to get really big, really messy, really, really vulnerable in a space with me. And I want to be able to choose the amount of time I give to clients and to choose the amount of clients I work with every month and not feel stressed or pressured, and to really be able to pull from a really wide toolbox different types of modalities that work for different people, no matter what. And you know what? One day you come in, and parts work therapy is working great. Next week it might be completely rejected by you. That's okay. We go to something else. So, this has been my experience. I hope I didn't ramble too much there. I would love to hear from you guys how you felt in therapy, if you ever felt like you got dropped at the last minute, because a lot of times we almost subconsciously will realize, oh my god, I need to make the most of my time here within 5 minutes of going out the door, and then we just get totally activated or dysregulated right as we're leaving. And so, as I said, I am not in any way attempting to blame therapists, coaches, whomever, for being bad people. I think it's a systemic issue. The whole system is super overloaded. It does, by its nature, deprive both the practice and the patient of a certain level of humanity, because otherwise the therapist would go crazy. There's just way too many people. They would never get a second off. And so there is this clinical nature to it to, I suppose, psychologically protect people on both sides. But of course, in an ideal world, I wish it wasn't there. So I would love to hear your feedback, how you've experienced the system of therapy, if you relate to any of this, or if you've had really good experiences. And yeah, if you're interested in working with me, all the links will be down below. My website's down there. I'll put my Instagram down there as well. I do lives on Instagram every Wednesday, so you can feel free to DM me any of your questions. There is a chance I will get to kind of give you a little bit of live coaching if I have a topic that addresses your question. And if you guys have other topics to request here, I would love to tackle them too, here on YouTube. So feel free to just comment away. Let me know your thoughts. And let me know your agreements or disagreements. And for real, if you guys have wonderful support, drop names. Drop names of people so that y'all can get the support that you need. Because it is very hard to find a therapist you trust, find a coach that you trust, in this big world out there right now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you with another video really soon.